Dead Boy Detectives is a new Netflix live-action spinoff from the Sandman universe, where we follow, surprisingly, two dead dudes who work as sleuthing ghosts. It's got cheeky humor and is a bit strange, but is it worth checking out? Charles and Edwin decided not to enter the afterlife to stay on Earth and investigate crimes that involve supernatural stuff. That was descriptive, right? Well, so like I mentioned, this series is part of the Sandman universe, and although it has a bit of edginess to it, this still feels very much geared towards a YA audience. And that's not because the protagonists are young men or that some of the people they work with are also younger. It's the composition of the story elements and then the cases that they take on. This is a pretty low-stakes series where we get new cases frequently, but the plots, they're not overly complex or heady. The larger overarching plot is engaging though, because of the growing relationships that we see. And I enjoyed a lot of the characters, especially a couple that start out as minor or side characters, but end up taking on more prominent arcs. Cassius Nelson playing Crystal, Yu Yu Kitamura as Nico, Brianna Cuoco as Jenny, and Lucas Gage as the Cat King, they each bring a certain quirkiness and eccentricity to their roles. And I especially love the character of Nico, as she's bubbly, positive, and very caring. She also adds a lot of subtle humor and then provides warmth when others in the cast are colder or harsher. Then Cuoco as Jenny, she is snarkily funny. She's direct and blunt, and I found it easy to relate to a lot of her responses as she deals with a lot of immaturity from the others. Now, the dynamic that's shared between Charles, Edwin, and Crystal, that helps to solidify the storytelling by just using their collective charisma and idiosyncrasies to build a believable friendship that is equally flawed and sweet. And because this centers around the supernatural, we can expect to see all sorts of odd images, even creatures. And the special effects, they're passable. I wouldn't classify them, though, anywhere near flawless. The texturing, realism, even the way the effects blend with the surroundings, they're far from perfect, which it can be distracting at times. I mean, I was able to not get too hung up on them because usually the graphics weren't the main crux of the storyline. I mean, they're just there to augment what's happening. And surprisingly, there are some scenes that are pretty gory and nasty as well. This is a lengthy series if you're looking to binge. It's 8 episodes that are each at just about an hour long. Surprisingly though, the pace is pretty even and quick. While some of the investigative portions may take their time, the story as a whole, it doesn't feel like it's wasting any time getting to the point. But even with that, there are portions of the story that are played up for humor or sarcasm, but they didn't really land for me. There are a couple of fae or sprites that start out having a minor role, then are brought back multiple times for some comedic relief. This wasn't needed, and it did feel like the humor was being forced in order to garner laughs when the scene was just doing fine without them. I'm curious, though, that if the reason they kept getting the screen time is because they're going to have a role in future stories. Aside from that, though, they were extraneous outside of one story contribution. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this has a slight edginess to it, but that it was still very mild. That's just because some of the story elements center around darker themes. Like, what is somebody willing to do in order to stay young, or maybe even the dangers inherent in obsession? I mean, these don't dive so deeply into dysfunction that they're terrifying, but depending on the age of viewers, it could be a little distressing. And even though this is geared towards the younger demographic, like mid-teens to early-ish 20s, as a dude in his 40s, I was still having fun with the show, and I was intrigued throughout. Now, something that is included in the story arc, but seems like exaggerated fluff, is how the detectives are being pursued by a governmental sort of group. I mean, this is employed to add tension and urgency to their actions and progressions, but also comes across as a distraction for every other arc. And I understand how the narrative is attempting to use this for increased pressure and then to keep energy high, but it's also artificial and forced, making it ultimately unnecessary. So what this boils down to is an imaginative and lighthearted series that infuses mystery with the supernatural to instill laughs and low-stakes suspense. The cast delivers endearing performances with great chemistry, allowing for believable and engaging relationships. The themes attempt to be dark, but are relatively mild, catering to a younger audience than may be expected. And while the special effects and graphics are only somewhat passable, and certain characters and arcs are bloated for false tension, the series is still enjoyable and fun thanks to the dynamics of the detectives and the way they banter and bicker while following the clues. I don't think this is a series to drop everything for, but if you like the Sandman series, you may want to give this one a go. There's no sex, maybe some very brief nudity, some profanity, and a lot of violence. I give Dead Boy Detectives 3.5 out of 5 couches. So what are you looking forward to binging in the coming days? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.